Days turned into weeks, and Kevin buried himself in work, partying, and his usual carefree lifestyle. Diane's call was nothing but a distant memory, a minor inconvenience he had shut out of his mind. One evening, as he relaxed in his apartment, his phone vibrated. Unknown number. Kelvin frowned. Not again. He ignored the call, but almost immediately another one came through. Then another. Annoyed, he picked up. Hello, a familiar voice came through. Tense and desperate. Kelvin, it's Diane. Please don't hang up. Kelvin sighed, rubbing his forehead. Diane, I thought I made myself clear. I don't want any parts in this. Kelvin, please just listen. Diane pleaded. I can't do this alone. This is your child too. Kelvin's temper fled. I told you to take care of it. Why are you still bothering me? Diane's voice broke. Kelvin, this is a human life. How can you be so heartless? Kelvin scoffed. You're the one who was careless. This wasn't supposed to happen. I don't know you well enough to be a father. Diane took a shaky breath. Kelvin, you might not want this child, but I do. I'm keeping the baby. Kelvin felt his chest tighten. Then do it without me. Diane let out a humorless laugh. Wow, just like that? You sleep with me, get me pregnant, and now you wash your hands off everything? I didn't sign up for this, Kelvin muttered. You signed up the moment you slept with me. Diane snapped. You're a coward, Kelvin. Kelvin rolled his eyes. Call me whatever you want, Diane. Just stop calling me. Lose my number. Diane's voice was trembling now. Kelvin, I'm giving you one last chance. Be in this child's life, or Kelvin cut her off. Or what? You think you can guilt trip me? He let out a dry laugh. Not happening. Don't call me again. And with that, he ended the call. Then, for good measure, he blocked her number. He exhaled, tossing his phone aside. That's it. Problem solved. He had no idea that his decision would haunt him for the rest of his life. Months passed, and Kelvin's life remained the same. Fast-paced, carefree, and filled with temporary pleasures. He focused on his career, went on expensive vacations, and kept his circle of friends small. Diane, she was completely erased from his mind. One evening, Kelvin and his close friends Emeka, Sammy, and Tunde sat in a high-end lounge, enjoying drinks after a long week. Kelvin, Emeka called, swilling his glass of whiskey. You've been different lately. No new girls? Kelvin smirked. I'm just taking things easy. Sammy chuckled. That's new. The legendary Kelvin, taking it easy. Tunde, who had been quiet, finally spoke. Maybe he's starting to grow up. Kelvin laughed. Come on, guys. I just realized that I should focus more on my career and less on random fun. Tunde raised a brow. Or maybe someone from your past reminded you of your mistakes. Kelvin stiffened for a second but quickly masked it with a smirk. I have no regrets, bro. No baggage, no drama. I'm free. Tunde sighed, shaking his head. I just hope you don't regret it later. Kelvin scoffed. Regret what? Life is good, my guy. Now let's drink. They raised their glasses in a toast, and just like that, Diane and her pregnancy were buried deeper into Kelvin's past. Or so he thought. Years later, Kelvin had changed. The once reckless university playboy was now a responsible and successful man. He had climbed the corporate ladder and was now working in a top firm with a fat salary and the respect of his peers. More importantly, he had found love. Her name was Becky. She was everything he never knew he needed. Beautiful, kind, smart, and a nurse who dedicated her life to helping others. Kelvin fell hard for her. One evening, he took Becky to a rooftop restaurant, the city lights twinkling below them. over a romantic dinner. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box, and got down on one knee. "Becky," gasped, covering her mouth. "Becky," Kelvin said, his heart pounding. "I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Becky's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, yes, Kelvin." Cheers erupted from the restaurant as Kelvin slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her deeply. For the first time in his life, he felt truly happy. He had moved on, but his past hadn't moved on from him. The early years of Kelvin and Becky's marriage were everything they had dreamed of. Their relationship was perfect, filled with love, laughter, and shared plans for the future. Becky was an amazing wife, and their connection seemed unbreakable. It didn't take long for Becky to tell Kelvin that she was pregnant. "I'm going to be a dad," Kelvin had asked, his eyes wild with disbelief. Becky smiled warmly, her hand resting on her growing belly. "Yes, yes you are. We are having a baby." Kelvin's heart swelled with joy. Finally, he was going to experience fatherhood, the joy he had denied himself for so long. For months, they prepared for their new arrival. They painted the nursery, picked out baby names, and dreamed about the future. Kelvin couldn't wait to meet his child. The life he had once discarded was now within reach. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It was a stormy evening when it happened. Becky had been feeling unwell all day, but she brushed it off as the usual pregnancy discomfort. However, by evening, she couldn't ignore the pain anymore. Kelvin rushed her to the hospital, panic rising in his chest. His heart was pounding as he held her hand, trying to calm her down. The doctors did their best to reassure them. "It's probably just a scare," one of the nurses said gently. "Let's get her settled in and we will run some tests." But as the hours passed, things didn't improve. The pain intensified, and soon the worst news they could have imagined came. "Mrs. Kelvin, I'm afraid we have lost the baby," the doctor said softly. "It's a miscarriage." Kelvin felt his world crash down around him. The baby was gone. Becky was crying uncontrollably, and Kelvin stood there, numb, trying to process the reality of the situation. He held Becky tightly, whispering comforting words he didn't even believe himself. "I'm so sorry," the doctor said, her voice compassionate but firm. "There's nothing we could have done." Kelvin barely heard her. His thoughts were racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. In the few weeks that followed, Becky tried to pull herself together, but the grief was overwhelming. Kelvin, too, was struggling. He threw himself into work, avoiding the painful memories, but every quiet moment at home reminded him of the emptiness in Becky's eyes. Months later, Becky was pregnant again. The doctors were cautious this time, warning them to take it easy, but they remained hopeful. The second miscarriage hit even harder. This time, Kelvin stayed with Becky throughout, his hands shaking as he tried to hold everything together, but his heart was breaking. They had tried again and again, and each time they lost everything. Becky was devastated. "Why does this keep happening, Kelvin? What's wrong with me?" Kelvin could barely find the words to comfort her. He didn't understand it either. "Don't say that, Becky. It's not your fault. We'll get through this," he whispered, though he wasn't sure how. When the third miscarriage came, it felt like a death. Becky was in tears, lying in the hospital bed. As Kelvin sat beside her, completely broken, the doctors were quiet, looking at the results and whispering among themselves. Finally, they broke the news. Becky had fibroids. Kelvin felt his stomach drop. Fibroids? The doctor nodded. Yes, it's a condition that can affect a woman's ability to carry a pregnancy. It's treatable, but in Becky's case, it caused significant damage to her reproductive organs. Kelvin tried to process what the doctor was saying, but the words didn't seem to sink in. Are you saying she can't have children? He asked, his voice trembling. The doctor nodded somberly. It's unlikely she'll be able to conceive again, even with treatment. Kelvin felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. His words seemed to fall apart in that moment. The child he had dreamed of having, the family he had imagined, all seemed so far out of reach now. Becky looked up at him, her face pale and broken. I'm so sorry, Kelvin. Kelvin held her hand tightly, but inside he felt lost. This wasn't the life they had planned. They had tried so hard, and now it seemed like everything had been taken from them. He thought of Diane, the woman from his past, the one who had called him about the pregnancy so many years ago. Could it be possible that she had kept the baby? The thought gnawed at him, but there was no way to know. In the following weeks, Kelvin couldn't shake the thought of Diane and the child she had told him about. Was it too late to make things right? He started to regret everything he had rejected years ago. The more he thought about it, the more it became clear that the child Diane had carried might have been his only chance at fatherhood. But how could he find her now? Kelvin spent countless nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, the weight of regret crushing him. He replayed every moment, every decision, and every cruel word he had spoken to Diane. Could he have been a father? He couldn't shake the thought of the child he had rejected, the son he might never meet. Out of desperation, Kelvin mastered the act of visiting beer parlors and drinking himself to stupor. After work every day, he would head straight to a bar and later return home drunk. His wife tried everything possible to stop him, but to no avail. One day, on one of such visits to the bar, Kelvin had just finished consuming few bottles of alcohol and was about to go home, but this time he couldn't because he was so intoxicated. He booked an Uber to come pick him. On their way home, Kelvin engaged the Uberman in a conversation. He told him about how life has been unfair to him. He also mentioned his state of childlessness to the man. The man sympathized with him and also told him his own story. I am not happy, he said. My son is very sick and currently admitted in the hospital. All the money I make from this Uber business goes to the hospital every day for my son's treatment, yet he is not getting better. Kelvin also encouraged the man to stay strong for his family. On getting to Kelvin's destination, he asked for the man's account details to make his payment through transfer, but the man requested that the transfer be made in his wife's account instead, so he can use the money to sort out few hospital expenses while I'm away. Without hesitating, Kelvin asked the man to call the account number. As he imputed the number, a name popped up, Diane Osifo. It was her. Though he was drunk, but he could recognize the name of his longtime one-night stand woman. He jokingly asked the man if the boy was his biological son, but the man explained that he married his wife a single mother and had decided to take the boy as his own since he loves the mother so much. That night, Kelvin could not sleep. He was excited she had kept the baby. There is still hope for me, he smiled. He thought of how to meet with his son, but what would he tell the man? The next morning, Kelvin booked the same Uber man again, but this time he told him he wants to help him with his son's hospital bills, that he was touched by his story the previous day. Ignorantly and happily, the man carried him and they both drove off to the hospital. As they arrived, the man led the way, but as they approached towards the door, they heard a woman wailing. He opened the door and Kelvin met Diane, sitting on the floor and holding the boy, weeping uncontrollably. "What happened?" the man asked. "Some moments ago, he had a seizure and died," she said. Tearfully, Kelvin's heart skipped. He was devastated. Diane kept asking questions, but he worked out on them. As he walked, he pondered in his heart. Could this be karma? He muttered with tears in his eyes. Obviously, karma has caught up with him, and there was nothing he could do.